Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're calling in from around the globe today. Welcome to today's webinar on tips to get your ERP implementation back on track. All right, before we get into the agenda, we posted in the chat that if you want to make sure that the presentation is not blurry on your end, make sure that you set your resolution to 720p. You can do this by going to the right, down to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you should have that ability to adjust to 750p so that, again, it won't be blurry on your end. Okay, a little bit about our agenda. So I'm going to start by giving a brief introduction of Panorama Consulting Solutions. Then we'll talk a little bit about today's purpose and why we're doing this webinar. We'll go into how you can do assessments and assess your project to avoid failure. I'll go through several warning signs that we've seen that could indicate that your project is headed toward failure. And then we'll give you some steps on what you can do to help bring your project back on track and do a little bit of project recovery. And as always, we'll leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to ask any questions. So please make sure as we go through, if you have any questions, jot them down, and then we'll answer them at the end. Okay, a little bit about Panorama Consulting Solutions. We are the world's leading enterprise consulting firm. We go into companies and we are completely agnostic in our approach. So a lot of times we like to go in and start with some management consulting. We want to understand what the company's strategy is, what their vision is, how they plan to deliver value to their customers. Once we understand all of that, then we'll help companies put together best practices on how they can achieve that, the strategic vision or their strategic initiatives. And then from there, we help them define requirements and then help them make a software selection. If it's a software that they need to implement, or sometimes it might just be improving different processes, or it may be outsourcing certain items within their organization. Whatever the need is, we help guide the companies through that process. And then if it is selecting a new technology, we have a great selection methodology that we use to help you go through that process, determining a long list, a short list of vendors, and then helping you through evaluating and selecting the right vendor for your organization or the right software for your organization. We also help do the change of management along with an ERP selection or implementation or any business process transformation. We know that it's really important that you communicate with your employees, that you build awareness, that you understand desire and help guide them and give them the knowledge that they need to be successful in whatever business transformation you may be going on. We also, because we're agnostic in our approach and we're not associated with any specific software package, we are often called in to do expert witness testimonies for companies that have failed or have had ERP failures. And then we also come in as well to help those companies or other companies that are going through an ERP failure and help them get their project back on track. So we do some independent verification and validation as well as project recovery. We do work in a variety of different industries. So our bread and butter is manufacturing and distribution. That's how we grew up as a company. But in most recent years, we're seeing a lot of work in other industries such as professional services, government, healthcare, food and beverage. And so we do have that expertise for whatever industry you may be working in. We have a global base of consultants around the world, and combined, our team has over 20 years of industry consulting and vendor experience. A lot of our consultants have their Six Sigma certification, their MBAs, or our project management professionals, as well as some have their certification in APIX. And ProSci, again, with the change management, we have several consultants on staff who have gone through the change management certification as well. And then we also, as a company, provide a 360-degree ERP certification program. So we can go out and train your company on how to do a selection process and an implementation, but we also make all of our consultants go through that training so that everybody's following the same methodology and we have consistency in our delivery. We have done the work around the globe in many different countries. We've been to Asia Pacific. We have projects being done in the Caribbean, Europe, the Middle East, North America, and South America. So we're quite global. We're used to working with companies that have locations in all of these different countries. And we do have a broad and deep ERP experience with different systems. So once we go through all the business strategy and understand your requirements, and we get down to selecting the right system for your company, we do have a lot of expertise on staff that have worked with a variety of different ERP softwares. So we understand very well what each of the softwares offer, where they fall short and where they're really strong. So we can help put together a really good long list vendors for your company, as well as shortlist vendors, and help you get to the short list. We also help companies with negotiations as well once they select a system, so that we know where different software vendors will budge on price, so we can help get you the best price for your software purchase as well as your implementation services. We do also use a team-based approach where we bring in consultants with specific expertise in specific areas to do all the different service offerings within Panorama. So we've got a bench of business process consultants. We have a bench of organizational change management consultants, a bench of vendor consultants, and a bench of just people who have gone through selection and implementation. So we bring in the right people at the right time to make sure that your entire project is a success. Okay, so that's a little bit about Panorama Consulting Solutions. Let's get into the purpose of today's webinar. So this is getting your ERP project back on track. So what we want to do is talk about why certain projects fail. As I mentioned, we do expert witness testimonies or expert witness cases. And so we have a good idea of why a lot of these ERP projects fail. So we want to talk through what are the common root causes of project failures. And then we want to talk about why it's important for your organization to do assessments of your project along the way, and when should you do those assessments so that you can try and be proactive in getting your project back on track versus reactive. So we'll talk through those assessments. I'll also discuss some of the warning signs that we've seen with projects, things that might raise a red flag and be an area of concern, so that you can look at your projects and say, do we have all of these items covered so that we have a less risk of failure as we go through this initiative. And then I'll wrap it up with talking about what a project recovery plan should have and the importance of it. All right, so assessing your project to avoid failure. All right, so when we look at all of our research, we do an ERP report every year where we have companies respond to a variety of different questions. These are companies that have gone through a selection or implementation or are in the process of going through selection and implementation. They provide their feedback to us. We don't know who these companies are. It's anonymous. But we do ask specific questions around company size, in terms of revenue, employees, global reach, so that we can then help, dissect and segment this information out. But through this report, as well as our expert witness accounts, this is how we've come up with the top reasons of why projects fail. So the number one, of course, is lack of executive buy-in. I cannot tell you enough how important it is to have executives bought into the project. People look to these individuals as leaders within the company, and these individuals are going to not only push the importance of an initiative down through their management teams, but also they're going to make sure that everybody within the organization is allowed the time to put into this project, because ERP projects or any kind of business transformation project can be intensive, and a lot of times individuals are required to do it on top of their day jobs. So having that executive buy-in not only is something that's really important because people look at the executives to follow. If the executives are bought in and they see that they are bought in, then they're going to buy in as well. But also, again, like I said, they're able to provide that commitment and the time for that commitment throughout the rest of the organization. Poor project management and controls. This is another reason why companies fail. So making sure that you have a project manager that has managed these types of projects before, having the right controls in place. So are you doing the right assessments or evaluations at the right time within a project? Unrealistic expectations early in the project. We hear it so many times from companies where, the executives or leadership team says, we need to get this system in, and it means I'm not going to pay any more than $500,000, and we need to get it in within 6 months. And that may not be realistic. So defining realistic expectations at the executive level and down through management is really important, so that people are not looking at the project as a failure if you're not hitting certain marks that you may not have set up for yourself. Too much focus on the technical aspects of the implementation, so allowing the techies to run it and not involving the business owners within your implementation. That's really important. The business leaders are the ones who know what they need to get done and why they need to get it done. So it's really important that the technical team listens to what the business requirements are, and that they design a system that's going to enhance and enable support those business requirements. That's going to make your project more successful. It's also going to get people to buy into it. You're going to have a higher adoption rate. Choosing the wrong software for your organization, so not selecting a system based on your business requirements, but just selecting a system because you've heard of it or it's well known out in the industry. You hear about SAP and Oracle, and they are great systems and they can do everything you want them to do. But if you're a mid-sized company or a smaller company, they may not make sense. So really identifying your business requirements, understanding what your organization needs to run the business, and then evaluate and decide which softwares are going to enable that the best. So it's really important to go through that selection process. Having too much customization of the software, you hear about this, you hear the two extremes. Some companies will say, we're just going to take out of the box, we're not going to customize at all. Well, that's risky and unlikely, because then you run the risk of losing your key differentiators, what makes you unique as a company and competitive in the industry. But if you go the other end where you're customizing everything, you run into higher costs and higher risks as well. And then failure to regularly identify and mitigate implementation risks along the way. So we'll talk about what those risks are in the upcoming slides. So why is it important to assess your project plan periodically? It's important because it provides a comprehensive view of a project's activities, the progress, performance, and underlying risks. So what we recommend companies do is that you set up a stage gate review at the end of each of your phases. So typical implementation phases follow the same structure. You start with planning, and then you get into define and design. And then you get into, once you've designed it, then you're going to test, you're going to build it. And then once you build it, you're going to test it. And then once you've tested it, then you're ready to go live. Well, within each of those streams, you want to make sure that you're doing a stage gate review where you've identified through, and you'll see, utilizes checklists, templates, and methodology. You'll identify what things have to take place in each stage. And as a project team and as an executive team, you go through these checklists and make sure that you can check them off before you move to the next phase of that implementation. Stage gate reviews are really important because they also highlight the risks that might be coming up as part of the project. And so it's really important not only to set up a risk management plan up front before you, in that planning process, before you even start the implementation, but as you go through each of your stage gates, you're going to start to add more risks to that plan. And you're going to be able to then put together good action plans, assign owners, and help mitigate those risks as you move forward within your implementation. So assessing your project is really important because it's doing that due diligence with the project team, with your executives, and it's allowing you to detect errors earlier, to be proactive in addressing any risks or issues that might be coming up as part of the project. It allows you to look at the quality of work that's being produced. So as part of your checklist, you might have that you need to review the project plan, and that you have accounted for not only the technical aspects of the project plan, but also the business process management activities that need to happen, as well as the change management activities that need to happen. Do you have people assigned to those tasks? Do you have the right templates? Are you following a methodology? These things, again, are detected in those stage gate reviews. And then at the end of your stage gate review, as a team, you make a decision. Do we feel comfortable moving to the next phase of this project? And then you move from example, plan, to design. So that's why number one is making sure that you're assessing your project at all times. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this already, but what are you looking at when you're assessing your project? So the things that you're looking at, whether it's at the beginning and you haven't even started, you want to avoid project failure, or whether you're in a crisis situation and you're going through a project failure and you want to get it back on track, these are the elements you want to consider: project management and governance control. So is someone managing the budget? Is someone managing the timeline? Have you set up a RACI matrix? Do you understand everybody's role and responsibility? Who is responsible? Who is accounted for? Or who's accountable? Who is consulted? And who do we have to inform for all the different activities that take place in this initiative or implementation? That's the first thing you want to do. Organizational change management. Are you accounting for change management within your project plan? Are you addressing the people side of the business? It's really important because people will become resistant if they're not being involved, if they don't feel like they're being heard. So are you communicating with the business? Are you driving awareness of the project and why you need to do this project? Are you then assessing desire, people's desire, whether it's a department or at an individual level? And if you are identifying pockets of resistance, why are people resistant, and what can you do to mitigate that and hedge against it? So having the right activities in place to help manage resistance is key. And then once you've gotten through that, you're going through this project of understanding what the change impacts are going to be. And so once you understand how people's roles are going to change, do you have the knowledge? What knowledge needs to be created and accounted for to make sure people are successful when you go live? And then do they have the ability or the skill sets to do these new roles and do these new activities within a system? And then that helps you refine the training and make a really good training plan that's addressing your entire organization at the department and individual levels. Data migration. People underestimate data migration. They think about it as an afterthought, but you really want to be thinking about it way up during the time when you're going through your selection project. So understanding what your data strategy is, having a strategy, knowing how much data you want to bring over into the new system, and is that data clean? And how are you going to cleanse that data? When we go through testing and conference room pilots, we like to follow a rule where 25% of your data is converted when you go through the first conference room pilot. When you go through the second conference room pilot, about 50 to 75% of the data should be in the system and converted and cleansed. And then the final 25% for a total of 100% of your data being in the system and cleansed should happen in the third conference room pilot. So you should have 3 conference room pilot tests and some kind of strategy to get data into the system to start testing it earlier versus later. Business process reengineering, looking at, are you including the subject matter experts in this project? Are you getting an understanding of what their requirements are for the system and why they need those specific requirements? And if you're redesigning a process because you want to take the opportunity to do best practice, understanding where the change impacts are going to be within your organization. So business process reengineering helps you identify the change impacts that then feed back into your change management strategy and how you're going to build the knowledge and assess the ability of individuals who are going to have to change as part of this project. Integration, do you understand where the integration points are and the cost of those integration points and what is being moved from one system to another? And then customization, of course, having good project governance around customization. So it's important that going into any project or initiative, you understand what your customization limits are. Are you only going to customize 25%? Are you going to customize 50%? What have you agreed to as a team? And then having some kind of project structure governance in place for approval of any additional customization. So it's really important that you understand what the customizations are going to be. And then if there are any additional customizations, that they go through an approval process up to the executives where someone is signing off that they're okay with this. Customizations equate to more money and higher costs. So this is where a lot of projects go off the rails. And this is where a lot of companies struggle from projects going over budget. So it's really important to understand your customization strategy and needs. Okay, so what we want to talk about now is then what are the warning signs? What are those canary in the coal mine type of signs you want to be looking for as part of your ERP project? And that's where that assessment comes into play, because if you make it part of, if you put the warning signs that I'm going to go through as part of your assessment through each of the stage gate reviews, it'll help you identify potential risks or project or problems ahead of time so that you can be more proactive in your approach versus that reactive approach. So the first warning sign is lack of regular project reviews with the executive team. So it's really important to involve your management team as needed to make sure that you have some kind of governance and accountability of the project and how it's moving forward. So you want to make sure that you're reviewing the project with your executive team on at least a bi-monthly basis at the beginning. I recommend all the way through. So making sure you have those regular meetings, steering committee meetings with your executives, because you want to make sure that you're constantly assessing whether the project is aligned with their expectations. One of the things is a lot of key business decisions are going to come up as part of your planning and design phase with your software vendors. So those key decisions need to be made in a timely manner to keep the project moving and on track. So by having these regular meetings with executives, you can bring these business decisions up to them and get timely decision and get a timely decision-making process in place. Also, you want to make sure that you have the right resources allocated appropriately, and having regular meetings with your executive team will allow you to bring up any issues. If you find that particular project members are not able to contribute as much as you originally planned because of their job, then the executives can help backfill those individuals or help you come up with another plan so that you can, again, keep that project on time, on budget. Okay, the second warning sign that we've seen in our experience is the lack of a dedicated project team. It's really hard for employees to do their day-to-day job and participate on the project 100%. So what we like to recommend is that you at least set up a dedicated small internal core project team. These are your A players, so it's tricky because you don't want to take these people out of business. They're the reason you do so well, but at the same time, it's their expertise that is going to really make the design and the build and the test of this project successful. So what we recommend is ahead of time, as you're going through the selection project and kind of identifying what software you want to go with, start thinking about who those core team members are going to be and start thinking about a backfill plan for them. So whether it's having someone who works for them start to take on some of their managers' responsibilities so that during this time they can do part of the managers or the leadership teams or the subject matter experts work while they're participating on the project. Or you may have to look at part-time people to bring in to help, or adding another employee to the organization to backfill that person. There's different ways you can do it. What I want to emphasize is that you really need to make sure that you've got some A team players. A small team is fine, but specific individuals who can be dedicated to this project, and you're not expecting them to do it on top of their normal day job. Okay, so we talked about the dedicated project team. The next warning sign is the lack of sufficient time for training. So one of the things we want to call out is that training should be scheduled more than 90 days prior to go live. And then you should have some refreshers set up. You don't want to be doing it right before you go live. Training is iterative, and that's why it should be planned out several sessions before you go live. So one of the things that is important is that if you do the right project management throughout your organization, throughout this implementation, then during that plan and design phase, you're going to really start to understand what the change impacts are going to be to specific functional areas within your company or departments, specific people. Once you've identified what those impacts are going to be, then you, like I mentioned, you start to develop the knowledge. So what does this department, what do these individuals need to be successful in using this new tool, or to be successful in implementing this project or this new process change? Once you've identified that, then you can assess each individual's ability to do this task or these new tasks. And we have a way that we work with the managers and the supervisors to assess each individual, because what's really important to understand is that there's a training strategy. There's not a one size fits all. You want to make sure that you're training the individuals based on their needs and that you're not leaving anyone behind. So beginning that training earlier in the project, especially with your core team members, will help them now become super users, and then they can go and help train individuals. If you've got end users that are participating in your conference room pilots and doing the testing, that's another opportunity to build awareness, knowledge, ability of the new system. there's many, many different ways to define your training strategy. And it's really important to understand your strategy up front, and that you plan the right amount of time to execute that strategy within your implementation. Training should never be an afterthought. And a lot of times what we find is that companies they're starting to see that their budget is overrunning. They're spending more than they originally anticipated, or they're starting to see their timelines slip. And the first thing they want to cut out is that training. And that's the worst thing to cut out. So make sure that upfront in your planning process, you're scheduling the right amount of trainings, that you're scheduling those change management activities that need to take place to help you identify what the right training strategy formats will be for your core team members, supervisors, and end users. Okay, the next warning sign: insufficient organizational change management. So I would say that in 90% of our expert witness testimonies or projects that we've been called in to assess and actually have gone to trial and testified is because of lack of change management. It's really, really important that you are creating that awareness within your organization for the change, that you're creating the desire, and that you understand where those pockets of resistance are within the organization, that you're identifying how people's roles, how their jobs are going to change, and that with those impacts, again, you're developing the knowledge and ability. An organizational change management plan consists of much more than just training. So a lot of companies will just think it's training. No, it's managing employee communications. When people don't hear information, they're going to make stuff up, and it's usually not positive. So you want to make sure that you have a good communication plan that is tailored by the stakeholders within your organization, because not every group is going to need to hear the same information at the same time. So having a good communication strategy is key. But first, understanding what the organizational design is going to be for your company. So if you are drastically changing your business processes, or you're leveraging best practice, you're going to have a software dictate what your process is going to be going forward. You want to make sure that you have the right people in the organization leading these specific areas so that you're set up for success. If you are implementing a supply chain best practice that is heavily focused on someone who you're going to go to an MRP model, that someone who understands MRP, who understands how it works, you want to make sure that the person you have leading that area has that expertise and can do it well. So that's just an example, but as you go through that strategy and as you understand your processes, that's where you will start to assess the organizational design and alignment. So that's really important, because those individuals are going to help you with the training needs and get the right people in the right places within the organization as you go through this implementation in terms of skill sets and ability. Process and organizational gap analysis, again, just understanding where those changes are going to be and addressing them. And then, a lot of times we start out engagements with some type of organizational readiness assessment. So understanding how your people want to receive information, how do your people want to be trained, and what are their expectations? What are the end users' expectations of this new system or this new business transformation? Once you understand from the end users what they want to see, then you can start to tailor your communications, your training around their needs and desires, which will help you gain that end user adoption, which is going to help you realize the benefits of putting in a new system. Which takes me to my next slide, which is the lack of business involvement in running the project. So making sure that you've got involvement from your business team. We had a client that the techies were running the project, and the organization backfilled the technical team, but they were very strict on the involvement of the business units. So they said that the business could not be involved in the implementation project more than 10% of their time. That put a lot of stress on the technical team, because the technical team doesn't understand what the business requirements are. They don't do the job every day. And so what happens is, if you have the technical people trying to design a system without input from the business isn't going to buy into it. And that's what happened within this organization. There was no end user adoption, because the business is saying, I can't use this. This system is not set up the way that I need it, because the technical people designed it and there was no input from me. They failed putting this system in place 4 times before we were brought into the company to do an assessment of what was going on and make a recommendation. So I can't stress enough that it's not an IT project, it's a business project, and you need to have business subject matter experts as part of the core team, as part of all of your phases, as part of the design phase, as part of the testing phase, and as part of training this new system. You'll find less employee resistance, and you'll experience less budget and cost overruns if you do it this way. And then the final warning sign that we've seen with companies is the lack of business case or benefits realization plan and performance metrics. So when we do our ERP study, our ERP report, we always find that a large percentage of the companies that respond, organizations that respond, state they realize greater than or less than 50% of the benefits. So the majority of the respondents typically will say that they're not realizing business benefits. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first reason is, of course, that if you don't define what kind of business benefit you expect to realize, and you don't have a baseline metric and anything to measure against it, then you're going to be blind. So the first thing is to set up some kind of business case or benefits realization plan. If you're in the middle of your project, you're still in a good place to put this together, because you haven't gone live yet. So make sure that you take a step back, and by department, even at the individual level, what is a benefit that each department and individual will experience because of this new business transformation or new technology. Once you've identified what that business benefit might be, maybe it's inventory turns, maybe it's less errors out in the field, less quality defects, whatever it may be, then you can define a KPI that can track that business benefit, and then take a measurement of what it is today, and then be able to measure it post go live. So that's first. Another reason why companies don't realize the business benefits is because, like I mentioned earlier, when companies start to experience some kind of overrun in cost, or their timeline starts to slip, they start to panic, and they start to cut things out that facilitate end user adoption. So they'll start to cut out the training, or they'll cut out conference room testing, pilot testing. And so when they do that, there's a high risk that the project is going to fail, because testing and training are 2 key components of any implementation plan. So it's really important that you set up some kind of benefit realization plan. And it also comes into play after you go live, in that post go live optimization, where you can now start to collect and analyze feedback from the employees or data that you've identified, KPIs you've identified, and start to audit it for compliance. Are people using the system as they should be? And then if you can diagnose gaps, identify root causes or pockets of resistance, and then put corrective action plans and coaching plans in place to address that. And then it also allows you to implement those corrective actions and then celebrate success. People like to be recognized and rewarded. So it's really important to set everybody up with some kind of benefit and goal so that you can reward them after the system goes live. Okay, so we talked about why you should assess your projects, the importance of assessing them. We talked about several warning signs to look for, those canary in the coal mine signs to look for that your project might be headed for failure. And so now what I want to just do is go through a couple of suggestions or steps you should take to recover your project. And if you're not in this situation, if you haven't even started, these are steps that you still would want to take to make sure that you have a successful implementation. So if you're in a project recovery, things are not going right, once the issues and risks have been identified through your assessment and then defining and planning, now you want to define and plan how to remediate against them. So you want to put together a formal project recovery plan. You want to have identified corrections to the overall project plan, to that risk management matrix I was talking about. And then you want to update your plan and address, some of the low-hanging fruit. So what do we do here? Make sure that you have a strong project management team or individual in place. Someone, again, who is managing the budget. Make sure that they're certified, that they have experience. Either they have a PMP certification or they have experience running an ERP project or business transformation project. They're going to make sure that they're following up with the right people. They're going to be tracking the budget. They're going to be making sure that you have quality deliverables and that people are adhering to that RACI matrix. Make sure that in your recovery plan, you're involving resources with ERP experience. So it's one of the things we do in our organizational change management assessments is we ask people, what is your experience with ERP? Or if you're just doing a business transformation, have you been involved in any kind of business transformation in the past? These are people you want to have on your project team because they understand the different activities that need to take place, the commitment required. So make sure that you have some people on your team with that ERP experience. Focus on business processes. Again, bringing in the business. So if you went through your assessment and you found that it's, things are failing because your techies are running a project and there's no involvement from the business, stop. Go to your executives, explain the importance of having those business subject matter experts included on the project team and involved in some of these sessions, and make sure that they're in the sessions moving forward. Make sure that you are maintaining the necessary project controls. So make sure you're having regular project meetings, status updates. Make sure you're reviewing your project with executives on at least a bi-monthly basis. Make sure you have some kind of chain of command when key business decisions have to be made. If they're not being made in a timely manner, who can you escalate to? So having an escalation path identified. Same goes for customizations. You don't want subject matter experts in the room with the software vendors saying, yeah, just customize, 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 and there's no visibility of that at a higher level. So having those types of project controls is really important. So if you find when you're doing your assessment that these are lacking, put them into your project recovery plan. Provide for adequate organizational change management. Again, through your assessment, if you found that change management activities are not happening, you are not communicating, there's no communications plan, communications are not going out to individual stakeholder groups. If you find that there's not any training strategy set up or training accounted for, understand what your training strategy is. Do you think that's the right training strategy for your organization? Is that how you guys have trained before? All of these questions, checklists, will help you identify whether you need to put some of these organizational change management activities into your project recovery plan. Do you have any kind of benefits realization plan identified? Any key performance metrics identified that can measure some of the business benefits you expect to realize as part of putting this business process in place or part of putting this software in place. If not, build one. This is one of those where you're not too late as long as you get it done before you go live. And then the last one is mitigate project and resource bottlenecks. So if you're finding that people are not able to dedicate time to the project, sit in on the required meetings because they are too busy trying to do their daily job on top of this, make sure you get that into your project recovery plan, get it up to the executives and explain the impact of this. The ability and the impact is going to be project timeline slipping, which results in higher costs for your implementation. So it's really important to make sure you have that right project team and resource set up. Again, if you're not in a recovery situation, if you're just starting out on your implementation, these are good check boxes to check off to make sure that you have a good implementation project plan set up with the right project controls, experience, people involved in change management activities, so that you're less likely to have to be in this situation where you're trying to recover your project. Okay, so as a wrap up, don't let the warning signs or the difficulties that we talked about today scare you or discourage you. You can get your project back on track. The number one key is that you're realizing that it's failing and that something is going wrong. So all you need to do is pause, take a step back, do your assessment of those 7 areas that we talked about, the project management, the data strategy, organizational change management, your testing, training, all of those elements that we discussed. Do an assessment and figure out where in those 7 elements you are lacking or could be a root cause of why your project is failing. Once you've done that analysis, then you can put together a good recovery plan. And, sometimes this is a good opportunity to bring in third-party experience as well. Sometimes executives and management are resistant against hearing from their organization, or they might not take you as seriously as they might take a third-party firm. So it could be worth having a third party come in and do this assessment and give that recommendation and feedback as well to get your project back on track. I'm going to check our chat and see if there's questions. There's one about, will we be sharing a slide deck? The slide deck, I believe, is on our YouTube, as well as if you would like a copy of it, please contact Laura Florence. Her email is here. I'll leave it up on the screen. She is our Director of Business Development. She can provide that to you. Laura.florence@panorama-consulting.com, or you could always call us and request it. Let's see. I'm just reading through the questions. Okay, it sounds like there weren't too many questions. There were a couple that did come up in terms of, do you think it's necessary to have an external consultant to be successful? Not necessarily. I think a lot of companies, you might have that expertise in-house, or you might have consultants, people who have done ERP projects in the past that can provide that experience or expertise. But I do think it's wise, especially in a project recovery situation, to bring in an external consulting firm or party to do an assessment and provide the recommendations up to your executive leadership team. Sometimes companies, it might make sense if you're limited on resources, if you're a very lean organization and you don't have a lot of people and your organization is not willing to backfill, it's good to bring in an external consultant who can do the heavy lifting during selection and implementation to take that stress off of your team. So that's a good opportunity if you're in that type of situation to bring in an external consultant. It might help you become very successful. You could even bring in external consultants to do kind of like that independent verification and validation. So those stage gate reviews I talked about, it might be beneficial to have an external consultant come in and perform those stage gate reviews with you so that they can highlight some areas of risks or issues that might be coming up and give you guys some suggestions on how you can manage those risks or mitigate those risks. So it could be beneficial in that situation as well. A lot of companies will hire us to come in to help with the change management. That's a big undertaking. People underestimate people. People don't want to change. It's hard to get them to change. So, but there's a lot of activities that need to be considered as part of your overall implementation plan to bring people along on that journey with you. So a lot of times having an external party come and do some of those change management activities could be helpful as well. Okay, I think that brings us to the top of the hour. So I want to thank everyone again for joining today's webinar. We hope we gave you some good pointers to consider and some ideas on how to get your project back on track. If you need a copy of the presentation, please call us or contact Laura Florence. And then again, I want to welcome everybody to join our boot camp in Chicago. It's a great opportunity, a great training event, especially if you're in that process where you're just starting to select or you're thinking about selecting a new system, or even if you've selected a new system and you're ready to go into implementation. Some really great learnings are shared, not just from the Panorama team, but as well as from other individuals attending the event. So if you're interested, please visit our website. Okay, I want thank you all again. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.